Twilight was falling softly over the city, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Inside the Monteverde mansion, a heavy air of tension filled the room. The patriarch of the family, Don Rafael Monteverde, lay in his bed, breathing with difficulty. His time in this world was running out, and everyone knew it. Dona Isabel, his wife of over 40 years, sat by his side, her eyes swollen from crying, as she held her husband's hand tightly. Their children, Alejandra and Gabriel, stood at the foot of the bed, sharing the same anguished silence. Alejandra, the eldest daughter, watched her father with a mix of sadness and despair. She had never been an expressive person, but seeing Don Rafael, the once strong and imposing man, reduced to a fragile and weak figure affected her more than she wanted to admit. Gabriel, the youngest, seemed petrified. His gaze was fixed on the floor, as if he was avoiding the reality looming over them. He had always sought his father's approval, and now, standing at the door of Don Rafael's death, he felt everything slipping through his fingers. The silence was broken by a soft knock on the door. An older man, dressed in a dark suit and with a serious expression, entered the room. He was the family lawyer, Licenciado Robles, a trusted confidant of Don Rafael for over 3 decades. He carried with him a worn leather folder and a sealed envelope. "I regret interrupting at such a difficult moment," Robles said in a solemn voice. "But Don Rafael has requested that we be present to read his final will." Dona Isabel, still clinging to her husband's hand, looked up with a mixture of confusion and fear. She hadn't expected this moment to come so soon. Neither Alejandra nor Gabriel moved, but a current of unease took hold of both of them. Why had their father decided to do this now, when he could barely speak? Don Rafael made a weak gesture, inviting the lawyer to approach. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke, but his words were clear. "It is necessary." Licenciado Robles approached the bed and opened the sealed envelope with meticulous precision. As he did, Alejandra felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew her father had managed many businesses throughout his life, but something in the atmosphere indicated that this will would not be like the previous ones. Gabriel, for his part, lifted his head and looked at his father with expectation, waiting to hear the final wishes of the man who had meant everything to him. "I, Rafael Monteverde, in full possession of my faculties," the lawyer began to read, but Don Rafael's voice interrupted him. "There's something else I need to tell you," he whispered, with visible effort. The look in his eyes reflected a mixture of guilt and determination. Alejandra and Gabriel exchanged confused glances. "Dad, don't speak, you need to rest," Alejandra said, her voice trembling with concern. Dona Isabel also tried to calm him, gently stroking his hand. But Don Rafael, with one last breath of strength, insisted. "I have another child." The words fell like a hammer blow in the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Dona Isabel paled, as if all her strength had left her at once. Alejandra was speechless, unable to process what she had just heard, while Gabriel felt a sudden violent pulse in his chest. What are you saying?" Alejandra finally stammered, her voice barely a thread of incredulity. "That can't be true." Don Rafael breathed with difficulty, his chest rising and falling with effort. "It's the truth. Before I met your mother, there was someone else. And from that relationship, a child was born." The shock in the room was palpable. Gabriel jumped to his feet, unable to contain his fury. "How is it possible that you never mentioned this before? Where is this child? What does this mean for us?" Dona Isabel covered her mouth, her eyes full of tears. For all those years, she had lived believing she knew every corner of her husband's past. But now, on his deathbed, he revealed a secret that changed everything. The lawyer, uncomfortable with the situation, cleared his throat and continued reading, as if the conversation in the room didn't affect him. "All my fortune will be left to my unknown son. What remains for Alejandra and Gabriel will be stipulated later." Alejandra felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. All of her father's fortune? To a child they didn't even know? What kind of cruel joke was this? Gabriel, completely enraged, took a step forward. "This is madness. We can't accept this. Dad, you have to explain to us who this son is. There must be a mistake." But Don Rafael, exhausted from the effort, could only murmur, "It's all I can tell you. He will come to claim what is his." The room fell silent once more, and the air seemed to grow heavy, difficult to breathe. Alejandra, her eyes full of tears, looked at her father without being able to say another word. Gabriel, with clenched fists, stormed out of the room without looking back, filled with anger and confusion. Donna Isabel, in a state of shock, could barely articulate a word. Her world, the life she had built with Don Rafael, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. And now, all that remained was uncertainty. A lost son, an inheritance in dispute, and a future that no longer seemed so clear. With Don Rafael's imminent death and the revelation of a lost son, the Monteverde family finds itself on the edge of an emotional abyss. Who is this mysterious son? And how will his arrival affect a family already fractured by pain and distrust? The morning sun had barely risen on the horizon when Alejandra, with red eyes and trembling hands, found herself alone in the vast living room of the Monteverde mansion. The velvet curtains were still drawn, creating a heavy atmosphere, mirroring her mood. The night before had been a whirlwind of emotions. After her father's devastating revelation, she had barely managed to sleep, her mind constantly replaying Don Rafael's words. "I have another child." Those words echoed endlessly in her mind. She couldn't imagine how someone who had been so upright and disciplined throughout his life could have hidden such a monumental secret. But beyond the confusion and pain, what tormented her most was the uncertainty about the future. What did this mean for her and her brother? Was her father's entire fortune about to fall into the hands of a complete stranger? The thought made her burn with anger, but at the same time, an odd sense of fear crept in. What if this lost child appeared and claimed what, according to the will, was rightfully his? The doors to the room opened slowly, and Gabriel appeared at the threshold. His expression was somber, his brow furrowed and his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. Without a word, he walked over to Alejandra and sat beside her on the large leather sofa. The siblings shared an awkward silence, as if words weren't enough to express what they were truly feeling. "Have you slept?" Gabriel finally asked, his voice hoarse from lack of rest. Alejandra shook her head. "And you?" "A little," Gabriel lied. In reality, he had spent the entire night wide awake, trying to find a solution, a way to stop his life from unraveling before his eyes. But there were no easy answers. Their father was on the verge of death, and with him went any chance of clarification about this mysterious lost child. All they had left was the will, and that damned document had thrown everything into chaos. "This can't be true," Alejandra muttered, more to herself than to Gabriel. "Dad wouldn't do this to us. He couldn't have kept something like this from us." Gabriel clenched his fists. "I don't understand it, Alejandra. Dad was always a good man, always taught us values, the importance of family. How is it possible that he had another child and kept it a secret all these years?" Alejandra abruptly stood up, beginning to pace back and forth, unable to stay still. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe it's not what we think. Maybe that child doesn't even know they exist. What if Dad included them in the will as some sort of protection? I don't know. None of this makes any sense." Gabriel watched his sister, feeling the same frustration boiling inside him. "The only thing we know for sure is that the will is real. The lawyer confirmed it last night, and Dad signed it while fully aware of what he was doing. There's no escape from this." Alejandra stopped pacing and looked at her brother in desperation. "So what do we do? Sit back and watch while someone else takes everything that's ours? Has our whole life been for nothing?" Gabriel rubbed his temples, trying to think clearly. He knew the situation was critical, but he couldn't afford to lose control. "No. We're not going to sit back and do nothing. We're going to fight for what's ours. We'll hire a private investigator. Someone who can dig into Dad's past and find out who this child is. If they exist, we'll find them, and we'll discover if they really have any right to what Dad left." Alejandra nodded, though her heart was still full of doubt. "And Mom? Do you think she knew something?" Gabriel shrugged. "I don't know. Mom was just as surprised last night. But we can't rule anything out. Maybe Dad told her something in the past and she decided to keep it quiet." Alejandra shuddered at the thought that her own mother might have been involved in such a dark secret. "I don't want to think that of her. She's already suffering too much." Gabriel sighed. No one said this would be easy. Just then, the doors to the room opened again, and Donna Isabel entered, dressed in a silk robe, her face pale and her eyes red. She looked like a shadow of the strong woman she once was. Her steps were shaky as she approached her children. "Mom." Alejandra rushed to support her by the arm, helping her sit in a nearby chair. "Are you okay?" Isabel nodded slowly, but her expression was grim. "Last night, I couldn't sleep. Your father's words, They keep echoing in my mind. I feel like my world has fallen apart. Gabriel watched her in silence, trying to gauge his words carefully. Mom, we need to know the truth. Did Dad ever talk to you about this child? Did you know anything? Donna Isabel looked up, and for a long moment, she seemed torn between guilt and fear. Finally, she let out a deep sigh. No, I didn't know anything. At least, not in the way you think. I knew Raphael had a relationship before he met me, but I never imagined that from that relationship a child had been born. If I had known... Tears began to well up in her eyes, and Alejandra hugged her, trying to comfort her. Gabriel, however, felt that something didn't add up. His mother had always been a sharp woman, with absolute control over everything that happened in the family. How could she not have suspected anything? Mom, are you sure? Gabriel pressed, his voice firmer. Was there no sign? No comment, no clue, nothing that could have made you think this was possible? Isabel shook her head, her tears falling slowly down her cheeks. I swear I didn't know. If I had known, I would have confronted it. Raphael wouldn't have kept something like this from me. At least, that's what I always thought. Gabriel clenched his teeth, feeling a mix of frustration and compassion for his mother. Maybe she was telling the truth, or maybe she was hiding something out of shame or fear. But in any case, there were too many unknowns. And the only way to get answers was by finding that lost child. Alejandra, who had remained silent until now, looked at her brother. We have to do something. We can't just let this go. Gabriel nodded. I'll contact the investigator today. We won't rest until we find the truth. As the Monteverde siblings embark on the search for the lost child, shadows from the past begin to envelop the family, revealing that not everything they thought they knew about their father and their life was as it seemed. The days following Don Raphael's death were a whirlwind of paperwork, mourning, and above all, uncertainty. Alejandra and Gabriel threw themselves into the search for answers, but the questions were many, and the clues, few. However, something emerged amidst all the chaos, an old box of documents that Don Raphael had stored in the back of a locked closet. That box, seemingly forgotten, contained letters, photographs, and papers from years ago, a time before Alejandra and Gabriel were even born. In one of those photographs, Gabriel found what would become their first clue. The image showed their father, much younger, smiling, with his arm around a woman they didn't recognize. She wasn't their mother. Something about the photo unsettled Gabriel deeply. His father's smile was genuine, even happy, and the woman at his side seemed comfortable, as if they were part of a life Gabriel had never imagined. On the back of the photograph, something was written by hand, Forever, R&E. Gabriel knew he had to share this with Alejandra, but at the same time, something inside him urged him to investigate further before making any moves. He felt like a stranger in his own father's life, and the more he delved, the more that feeling of distance grew, as if everything he thought he knew about his family had been built on a lie. That afternoon, Alejandra walked into the study, where Gabriel was staring at the photograph with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. What are you looking at? She asked, approaching the desk. Gabriel, after a moment of hesitation, handed her the photo. Alejandra examined it in silence for several seconds before finally speaking. Who is she? I don't know, Gabriel replied, crossing his arms. But I think she might be the key to understanding who this child Dad mentioned really is. Alejandra looked up from the photograph, a mix of surprise and confusion on her face. Why didn't you show me this sooner? I wanted to make sure it meant something before worrying us even more, Gabriel replied, though deep down he knew part of him wanted to process everything on his own. Alejandra had always been more rational, more controlled, and Gabriel needed time to deal with the emotional storm raging in his mind. And what do you plan to do now? She asked, trying to remain calm, though frustration was beginning to creep into her voice. Gabriel sighed deeply, leaning against the desk. I've been looking through Dad's files, trying to figure out who this woman might be, but there's nothing else besides this photo. No letters, no names, just those initials, R&E. I think the only way to know more is to find someone who knew Dad back then, someone who can give us more information. Alejandra nodded slowly. Do you think Mom knows anything about this? Gabriel shook his head. I don't know. She swears she didn't know anything, and I don't want to push her. I think she's just as confused as we are. Alejandra frowned, sensing that something was still missing. Maybe the lawyer knows something. He worked with Dad for many years. If there are more details we don't know, it's possible they're in the legal documents. Gabriel agreed, but there was something about the photograph that he couldn't stop staring at. The connection between his father and this unknown woman seemed far deeper than anyone in their family had ever imagined. Could this woman be the mother of the lost child? And if she was, why had Don Rafael kept it all hidden for so many years? They decided that the best course of action would be to speak with a lawyer the following day. Robles had handled all of Don Rafael's legal affairs for decades, and if anyone knew the truth, it would be him. The next day, in Licenciado Robles' office, the tension was palpable. The Monteverde siblings sat across from the lawyer, who, with his typical serious and professional demeanor, seemed willing to help them. Gabriel was the first to speak. "We found a photograph of our father with a woman we don't recognize. We believe it might be related to the will and the child he mentioned before he died. Do you know anything about this?" Robles, always careful with his words, paused before responding. Don Rafael was a reserved man in many aspects of his personal life. "What I can tell you is that, legally, all the documents related to his estate and the will are in order. However, I am not aware of any prior relationship before his marriage that resulted in a child. That is not something reflected in any document I have in my possession." Alejandra leaned forward. "But you've worked with our family for years. Did you never hear anything about this woman? We know she existed, we saw her in the photo." The lawyer looked visibly uncomfortable. "Don Rafael did mention to me, many years ago, that there was someone important in his life before he got married, but he never gave me details. He asked me not to look into his past, and as his lawyer, I respected that decision." Gabriel exchanged a glance with Alejandra. They knew Robles wasn't telling them everything. There was more, something the lawyer didn't want to reveal. But they also knew that pressing him further wouldn't give them the full answer. As they left the office, Gabriel broke the silence. "He didn't tell us everything." "I know," Alejandra replied, her jaw clenched. "But I don't think pushing him will get us anywhere." The siblings returned to the mansion with more questions than answers. That night, as Gabriel combed through the documents again, he found a letter he hadn't seen before. It was a short note, handwritten, but unsigned. It simply said, "She's still there. Look for her in the place where it all began." Gabriel froze, reading those words over and over. It was a clue. A clue from someone who knew more than they had discovered so far. Who had written that note? And what did they mean by the place where it all began? With his heart racing, Gabriel called Alejandra, and together they read the note under the dim light of the study. "What does this mean?" Alejandra asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Gabriel replied, "but I think it's our next step. If there's someone who still knows something, we have to find them." Gabriel and Alejandra are faced with a new mystery, a clue that could lead them to the origin of the entire truth. What happened in their father's past that led him to hide so much? And who is this woman who still seems to play a key role in everything? The answers might be closer than they imagine, but the danger of discovering them grows with each step they take. The atmosphere inside the Monteverde mansion had grown heavier with each passing day. Gabriel and Alejandra were now carrying the weight of a secret they had never imagined, and the note they had found had become an obsession for Gabriel. The place where it all began echoed in his mind, driving him to search for answers. That afternoon, as they sat in the study, Gabriel paced back and forth, trying to piece together the puzzle. The photograph of their father with an unknown woman and the cryptic note remained at the center of his focus. "We have to figure out what the place where it all began means," said Gabriel, frustrated. "But how are we supposed to know where it is? It could be anywhere." Alejandra, more thoughtful, studied the photograph carefully, searching for a clue. Suddenly, an idea formed in her mind. "Do you remember the stories Dad used to tell us about a town he used to visit before he met Mom?" Gabriel furrowed his brow, trying to recall. "Yes, he mentioned something about that. San Pedro del Rio, I think it was called. He said he went there for business, but there was always something more in his voice, like he was fond of that place." Alejandra nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the place where it all began. Perhaps the key to understanding everything is there." "It's possible," Gabriel said, becoming more convinced. "We have to go there." The decision was made. The next morning, they set off on a journey to San Pedro del Rio. The trip, through winding mountain roads and small villages, gave them time to reflect on what they were about to uncover. They knew that what they might find there could forever change how they viewed their father, but their need for answers outweighed any fear. When they arrived, the town was just as they had imagined, small and peaceful, with cobblestone streets and colonial houses that seemed frozen in time. As they walked through its narrow streets, Alejandra couldn't shake the strange feeling of familiarity, as if she had been there before. Maybe it was the way their father had painted a picture of the place in their childhood stories, or maybe it was something deeper, a sense of destiny pulling them closer to the truth. They headed to the local inn, where the owner, Senora Mendoza, greeted them with a kind smile. Gabriel wasted no time asking if she remembered their father. Rafael Monteverde, she repeated, her expression immediately changing. Yes, I remember him. He used to come here often, many years ago. A good man, but he suddenly stopped visiting. Do you know who he had a relationship with in this town? Alejandra asked, trying to keep her composure. He was close to a woman named Elisa, the innkeeper replied. They were very close, but she passed away many years ago. They had a son, but he left town after she died. Alejandra felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of Elisa. Could she be the woman from the photograph? Could the lost son be hers? Do you know where her son is now? She asked, her voice full of urgency. I don't know exactly where he is, Senora Mendoza said thoughtfully, but I know Elisa's sister, Mariana, still lives here. She might know more. Wasting no time, Gabriel and Alejandra headed to the outskirts of the town, where Mariana's small house was located. The walk was long, but their determination kept them going. Finally, they reached the modest home. Mariana, a woman in her 60s with a face marked by life's hardships, greeted them with a cautious look. After explaining who they were and why they had come, she invited them inside. The interior of the house was simply decorated, with old furniture and black and white photographs on the walls, many of which seemed to be of Mariana and Elisa's family. The atmosphere was quiet, yet filled with an untold story waiting to emerge. Mariana listened in silence as Gabriel and Alejandra recounted everything they had discovered about their father's past and his connection to Elisa. Her face remained impassive, but as the conversation progressed, her gaze became more distant, as if memories were pulling her into a painful place. When they finished, Mariana sat in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. I always knew this day would come. Elisa loved your father deeply, but when he left, it broke her. She never told her son the truth about his father. She wanted to protect him from the pain of knowing that his father hadn't been there. Alejandra felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to Mariana's words. She had known her father had been a man of secrets, but hearing about the pain he had caused Elisa and her son was something she hadn't expected. Where is he now? Gabriel asked, his voice firm but filled with emotion. Mariana looked at them with a heavy sigh. His name is Andres. He left for the city a long time ago, but I've kept in touch with him. He doesn't know the full story, but if you're looking for answers, I can help you find him. Mariana's words brought a mixture of relief and fear. They were one step closer to uncovering the truth, but that truth seemed far more painful than they had anticipated. With a name and a solid lead, Gabriel and Alejandra are one step closer to discovering the truth about their father's secret child. But as they prepare to find Andres, the weight of the past grows heavier. The answers they are about to find could change everything they thought they knew forever. The sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains when Gabriel and Alejandra woke up in the small inn at San Pedro del Rio. The cool morning air carried with it a sense of anticipation, as though something important was about to be revealed. After speaking with Mariana the previous afternoon, the two had spent the night restless, thinking about everything she had told them. The name of their father's lost son, Andres, echoed in their minds. They knew they were about to take the next step in a search that was becoming increasingly complicated. As they prepared to leave for the city where Andres lived, Alejandra couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and curiosity. What would Elisa's son be like? Did he know anything about his father, or had they arrived too late to uncover the truth? Gabriel, on the other hand, remained serious and focused, determined not to stop until they had the answers they so desperately needed. Are you ready? Gabriel asked, adjusting his jacket before leaving the room. Alejandra nodded slowly. Yes, but I can't help feeling nervous. We don't know what we're going to find, Gabriel. What if Andres wants nothing to do with us? What if he refuses to talk? Gabriel paused and looked her in the eye. I know, but we can't give up now. We've come too far. If Andres really is Dad's son, he has a right to know the truth, just like we do. With that determination, they headed to the car they had rented, ready to begin the journey to the city. The drive was long and quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts. San Pedro del Rio had been the first step in uncovering their father's hidden past, But the real test awaited them in the city, where they would have to confront the reality of this lost son and the implications of his existence. When they arrived in the city, sunlight filtered through the tall buildings, and the bustling urban life contrasted sharply with the peaceful town they had left behind. Mariana had given them Andres' address, and although they didn't know if he would be willing to speak with them, at least they knew where to start. The building where Andres lived wasn't luxurious, but it didn't seem run down either. It was modest, located in a quiet part of the city, which gave Gabriel and Alejandra a slight sense of relief. They had feared that Andres might have fallen into hardship after his mother's death, but at least, it appeared he had managed to maintain a stable life. "Well, here we are," Gabriel said, looking at the building with a hint of apprehension. "It's time to find out if Andres is willing to meet us." Alejandra took a deep breath before nodding. "Let's do this. We've got nothing to lose." They climbed the stairs to the third floor and stopped in front of Andres' apartment door. Alejandra's heart was racing, and Gabriel clenched his fists, trying to steady his nerves. With one last exchange of glances, Gabriel raised his hand and knocked on the door. A few seconds passed, which felt like an eternity, before the door slowly opened. A tall man, in his 30s, with dark hair and deep-set eyes, appeared in the doorway. His expression was neutral, but as he saw Gabriel and Alejandra, a faint shadow of distrust crossed his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. Gabriel stepped forward. "You're Andres, right?" "We're Gabriel and Alejandra Monteverde. We believe that. We're your siblings." The words fell like a stone in the air. Andres didn't say anything at first, just stared at them, trying to process what he had just heard. Then, his brow furrowed, visibly confused. "My siblings?" Andres repeated, his tone incredulous. "What are you talking about?" Alejandra, sensing the tension in the air, decided to step in. "We know everything about your mother, Elisa, and our connection. Our father, Rafael Monteverde, had a relationship with her. We know this must be a shock for you, but we've come here to try to understand what happened." Andres crossed his arms and stepped back, clearly disturbed by the revelation. "I don't understand any of this. My mother never told me anything about a Rafael Monteverde. I grew up not knowing who my father was. Why are you telling me this now?" Gabriel tried to ease the situation. "We understand. We know this is hard, but we didn't know you existed until recently. Our father died a few weeks ago, and that's when everything came to light. We just want to meet you and understand what happened between our parents." Andres remained silent, watching them with a mix of confusion and skepticism. He could see that Gabriel and Alejandra didn't seem to have bad intentions, but the truth they were revealing to him was overwhelming. Finally, he sighed and opened the door fully. "I suppose you should come in," he said, resignation in his voice. "There's a lot to talk about." Gabriel and Alejandra followed him inside the apartment, a small but cozy place. They sat in the living room, still feeling the weight of the tension in the air. Andres studied them closely before speaking. "My mother always told me that my father wasn't in our lives because he didn't want to be," Andres confessed, his expression somber. "She never mentioned his name, and I never asked questions. I guess I resigned myself to not knowing." Alejandra looked at him with empathy. "I'm so sorry, Andres. We don't know all the details, but what we've discovered is that our father had to make difficult decisions. We're not here to justify what he did, but we thought you had a right to know the truth." Andres nodded slowly, his expression still cautious but less hostile. "It's strange. I never imagined I had family out there, let alone siblings. But if what you're saying is true, I guess I want to know more." Gabriel exchanged a glance with Alejandra, feeling that they were finally making progress in connecting with Andres. It had been a long and emotionally charged day, but they knew this was just the beginning of a deeper conversation. As Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres begin to uncover the past, the questions surrounding their father's legacy and the decisions he made become increasingly complex. With the start of this new relationship, the doors opened to a sea of emotions and secrets that could change their lives forever. The tension in Andres' apartment lingered in the air like an invisible weight, pressing down on Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres as they sat in the small living room. The revelation of their shared connection had brought the three of them together, but it was clear that this was only the beginning. Each of them was grappling with the truth in their own way, trying to piece together the fragments of a past none of them had ever fully understood. After a long moment of silence, Alejandra was the first to speak, her voice soft but steady. "We didn't come here just to tell you about our father, Andres. We came because we want to understand what happened. We've uncovered bits and pieces, but there are still so many gaps. We were hoping you might be able to fill in some of the blanks." Andres leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them. His face was still clouded with disbelief, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "I don't know if I can help you. Like I said, my mother never talked about my father. She always said he wasn't interested in us, and I grew up thinking that was the end of it." Sensing an opening, Gabriel leaned forward. "What about letters, photos, or anything from that time? Did she keep anything that might point to their relationship?" Andres shook his head slowly. "I don't remember seeing anything like that. If she did keep something, she hid it well. But there was one thing that always struck me as odd." He paused, as if debating whether or not to continue. Alejandra noticed his hesitation and gently encouraged him. "What is it, Andres? It might be important." He sighed and looked down at the floor. "When I was a teenager, I found a small box in her closet. I was looking for something completely unrelated, but when I opened it, there were a few old documents inside. At the time, they didn't make sense to me, but now," his voice trailed off as he stood up and left the room. Gabriel and Alejandra exchanged a glance, a spark of hope lighting up between them. They waited in silence as Andres disappeared into the back of the apartment. A few moments later, he returned, holding a worn wooden box. He placed it on the coffee table in front of them, his expression a mix of uncertainty and determination. "This is it," Andres said quietly. "I haven't looked inside it in years, but if there's anything that could tell us more about my mother and your father, it might be in here." With trembling hands, Andres lifted the lid. Inside were several old papers, yellowed with age, and a faded photograph that immediately caught Gabriel's eye. He reached for the photo, and as he turned it over, his heart skipped a beat. It was a picture of their father, much younger, standing beside a beautiful woman with dark hair, Elisa. The image was unmistakable, and seeing the two of them together, smiling and happy, brought a rush of emotions that Gabriel wasn't prepared for. "Is this your mother?" Alejandra asked softly, her eyes fixed on the photograph. Andres nodded. "Yes. That's Elisa." Gabriel held the photo in his hands, staring at his father's face. He had always seen this man as a pillar of strength, someone who had been present in their lives, and yet here was proof that their father had led an entirely separate existence. The photo showed a side of him that they had never known, carefree, deeply connected to someone else, someone who wasn't their mother. "There's more," Andres said, pulling out a stack of letters. He handed them to Gabriel and Alejandra. "I never understood these before, but I think they're from your father." Alejandra carefully unfolded one of the letters, the paper brittle between her fingers. As she began to read, her breath caught in her throat. "Mi querida Elisa. Not a day passes without me thinking of you and the child you carry. If circumstances were different, if I could be by your side, believe me, I would. But you know I can't. My life, my family, they're here, in a place I can't escape. I will never be able to give you everything you deserve, but I hope that, one day, you will forgive me. With all my love. Rafael." The room seemed to close in around Alejandra as she finished reading. She handed the letter to Gabriel, who read it in stunned silence. "So he knew," Gabriel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He knew about you, Andres. He knew about your mother, and yet, he chose to stay away." Andres' face tightened, a mixture of hurt and anger flashing across his features. "So that's it, then. He knew all along and still didn't want anything to do with us." Alejandra shook her head, struggling to make sense of it all. "I don't think it was that simple. The letter, it sounds like he was torn. He didn't abandon you because he didn't care. He left because he thought he had no other choice." Gabriel leaned forward, trying to reason with Andres. "Our father was a complicated man, and I don't think we'll ever fully understand why he made the choices he did. But the fact that he wrote to your mother, that he tried to explain himself, it means something. He did care, Andres." Andres stood up abruptly, walking to the window and staring out at the city below. "Maybe he did care, but that doesn't change the fact that I grew up without a father. My mother had to raise me on her own, and she never told me any of this. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Gabriel and Alejandra fell silent, both feeling the weight of Andres' words. They couldn't fully understand his pain, but they could feel the enormity of what he was going through. Gabriel stood and walked over to Andres, standing beside him at the window. "I don't know what it was like for you," Gabriel said softly, "but I know that this isn't easy for any of us. Our father wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, and those mistakes hurt people. But maybe now, after all these years, we can start to heal. Together." Andres didn't respond at first, his gaze still fixed on the world outside. But after a long pause, he finally nodded, his voice quiet and heavy. "I guess you're right. There's no point holding on to all this anger. I can't change the past." Alejandra joined them at the window, placing a hand on Andres' shoulder. "None of us can. But we can move forward, now that we know the truth." For a moment, the three of them stood together in silence, watching the city bustle beneath them. The past had been a source of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions, but now, they had begun to find some clarity. The journey wasn't over, but it felt as though they had taken a crucial step toward understanding. With the truth of their father's past finally coming to light, Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres faced the challenge of building a relationship amidst the complexities of their shared history. But as they begin to come to terms with their father's choices, new questions arise, questions that could lead them deeper into the secrets of their family's legacy. The silence that followed the conversation with Andres left Gabriel and Alejandra with a whirlwind of emotions. They had uncovered the truth about their father's past, but instead of bringing them relief, it seemed to raise even more questions and reopen old wounds. Gabriel, in particular, couldn't stop thinking about how his perception of his father had shifted. That strong, unwavering man now appeared as someone who had hidden an important part of his life, a vulnerable side he had never shown them. "What do we do now?" Alejandra asked, breaking the silence as they walked toward the car. The city seemed louder than usual, or perhaps it was that their thoughts were now shouting louder than the traffic. Gabriel looked at her with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "I don't know. Andres has the right to process all this in his own way. But at the same time, we can't ignore what we've learned. Our family is broken, but at least we have a chance to mend it. Do you think Andres will want to be part of our family? After all this?" "I'm not sure I would, if I were him," Alejandra replied, doubt clouding her expression. Gabriel paused, staring at the horizon where the city's buildings towered imposingly. "I don't know. But if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about the decisions we make after everything has been revealed." The days that followed were uncomfortable for everyone. Gabriel and Alejandra returned to the Monteverde mansion with a feeling that, although they had taken a step toward the truth, the future remained uncertain. There was so much to process, so much to take in. And above all, the pain of discovering that their father had lived a double life without them knowing. In the mansion, Donna Isabel, Gabriel, and Alejandra's mother had begun to suspect that something wasn't right. She knew her children had been investigating, but she couldn't imagine the magnitude of what they had found. One afternoon, while Gabriel was going through old papers in his father's study, Isabel quietly entered the room. "What have you been looking for in all of this, Gabriel?" Isabel asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Gabriel, surprised by her presence, slowly lifted his gaze, unsure how to begin the conversation that was inevitably coming. He knew that his mother had been a collateral victim in this whole story, but he also knew that they could no longer keep the truth from her. "Mom, we've discovered something about Dad. Something we never imagined," Gabriel said, his voice heavy with the burden of what he was about to confess. Isabel sat down in a nearby chair, her hands trembling. "What are you talking about? What kind of secret could your father have hidden?" Gabriel took a deep breath, knowing there was no easy way to say it. "Dad had another family. Before he met you, he had a relationship with a woman named Elisa. And from that relationship, a son was born. That son is Andres. We found him." The words fell like a stone into the water, creating ripples of shock that seemed to fill the room. Donna Isabel visibly paled, her eyes searching her son's face for some kind of explanation. "What are you saying? That can't be true. Raphael would never have hidden something like that from me," Isabel mumbled, her voice breaking as tears began to fill her eyes. Gabriel stood up and walked over to his mother, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We didn't want you to find out this way, but we can't keep hiding the truth. We found letters, photos, everything that proves Andres really is our brother." Isabel covered her mouth with one hand, silently sobbing. Everything she had believed about her husband, the life they had shared for decades, now seemed like a mirage shattered by the revelation of this secret. "Why didn't he tell me? How could he live with this, with everything we built together?" Gabriel didn't have any answers for those questions. All he knew was that his father had made decisions that were now destroying the peace they had once known. Isabel, in the midst of her pain, also understood that there was more to this story than she could see at first glance. Weeks passed, and the relationship between Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres remained tense. After the initial revelation, Andres had distanced himself, trying to process everything he had learned. He had begun to understand the complexities of his father's life, but he wasn't ready to forgive, at least not yet. One day, however, Gabriel received an unexpected call. It was Andres. "We need to talk," Andres said firmly. "I've been thinking a lot about what we discovered, and I can't keep avoiding this." Gabriel nodded, even though Andres couldn't see him. "I know. We haven't stopped thinking about it either. We need to find a way to move forward." That afternoon, the three siblings met at a cafe. It was a modest place, unpretentious, but at that moment, it seemed like the perfect setting for a difficult conversation. Andres arrived first, followed by Alejandra and Gabriel. They greeted each other cautiously, but there was less tension in the air than before. "I want to understand something," Andres began, looking directly at Gabriel. "What was our father like for you? Because I grew up with nothing, and you had everything. I want to know if he really was the man I believed didn't want me." Alejandra was the first to respond, tears welling up in her eyes. "For us, Dad was always a strong man, a protector. But now I see there was so much more to him that we didn't know. I know he hurt you, and that hurts us too, because we feel like he lied to all of us." Gabriel nodded, backing up his sister. "Our father was complicated. He made decisions that are now affecting all of us. But, Andres, I believe he regretted what he did. Maybe he never knew how to face it, and that's something we all have to carry now." Andres looked at them in silence for a few moments, absorbing what they had said. "I don't know if I can forgive our father for not being there for me, but I'm starting to understand why he did what he did. Maybe that's enough to start healing." The three siblings exchanged glances, knowing this was just the beginning of a long road toward reconciliation. But at least, in that small cafe, they were together, ready to confront their pain and the shadows of their past. As Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres continue navigating the complexities of their family history, a new revelation is about to surface. The truth about Raphael's inheritance could bring with it an even greater conflict, testing the fragile bonds they have only just begun to rebuild. After weeks of uncertainty, tension, and shocking revelations, Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres found themselves at a crucial moment. Although the wounds of the past remained open, the time they had spent together in recent weeks had at least allowed them to begin understanding the complexity of their father's life. But something still loomed over them: Rafael Monteverde's inheritance, a legacy that could be both a blessing and a curse. It was a rainy afternoon when the three siblings received a call from the family lawyer, Licenciado Robles. He had informed them that there were unresolved issues regarding the will that urgently needed to be discussed. With little more information, the three of them made their way to Robles' office with a sense of unease. Gabriel was the first to arrive, followed by Alejandra, and finally, Andres. Although things between them were less tense than before, there was still a lingering discomfort whenever they were together. Andres had been cautious since the truth about his father was revealed, and while he hadn't completely rejected his new siblings, he hadn't fully accepted his place in the family either. When they entered the office, Licenciado Robles greeted them with a serious expression, clearly aware of the delicacy of the situation. They sat down across from him, with the sound of rain tapping against the windows, creating a heavy atmosphere. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Robles began, interlacing his fingers on the desk. "I know these past few weeks have been difficult for you all, and I regret that I must add to that burden, but there are certain aspects of your father's will that need to be addressed." Gabriel, always the most direct of the three, was the first to speak. "What's this about? We thought everything was resolved. We know Andres is part of the inheritance, and we've accepted that. What else is left to discuss?" The lawyer took a deep breath and pulled a sealed envelope from his desk, one that seemed to have been kept for a long time. "What you didn't know is that your father left additional instructions that could not be revealed until all of you were present and aware of Andres' existence. This envelope contains those instructions." Alejandra looked at the envelope with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. "Why did he hide this from us? Wasn't everything we've already learned enough?" With a solemn gesture, Robles carefully opened the envelope and began to read aloud. "To my children, Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres. If you're reading this, it means you've already learned the truth about my life and my mistakes. What I leave you now is not just a matter of money or property, but an opportunity to heal the wounds I've caused. The inheritance you will receive is to be shared equally, regardless of who has known me longer or who has only come to know me at the end. Each of you has the right to decide whether to accept or reject this inheritance, but my final wish is that you do so together, as a family. If any of you rejects your share, the inheritance will be donated to charity. I only ask that you remember, even though I was not the perfect father, I always wanted the best for you, even if I didn't know how to show it. Forgive me, if you can. With all my love. Rafael Monteverde. The silence that followed the reading of the letter was profound, as if the weight of their father's words had fallen on them like a stone. Gabriel, who had been holding his breath, finally spoke. I can't believe Dad left us this decision. I thought everything would be clear once the will was settled. Alejandra, for her part, was visibly emotional. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they weren't just from sadness, but from a deep sense of confusion. Dad really wanted us to be a family, despite everything he did. He left us more than money. He left us a choice, and I don't know what to do with it. Andres, who had remained silent until that moment, finally raised his head, his expression serious but calmer than in previous weeks. I don't know if I can forgive our father for not being in my life. It's something I've struggled with every day since I found out the truth. But I don't want to be the reason everything he built is lost. This inheritance isn't just about money, as he said in the letter. It's his last attempt to make us what he could never be, a family. Gabriel and Alejandra looked at him in surprise. For weeks, they had expected Andres to walk away, to reject any connection with them and with their father. But here he was, showing a maturity and understanding that even they weren't sure they possessed. So, what do we decide? Gabriel asked, looking at his two siblings. Do we accept this? Can we do it together? Alejandra nodded slowly. I don't want everything we've been through to end in nothing. If Dad wanted us to be a family, the least we can do is try. Andres took a deep breath, looking both of his new siblings in the eye. I don't know what this will be like. I don't know if I'll ever feel the way you do about him. But I do know that I don't want to live with any more regrets. I'll accept my share, if you both do too. The relief in the room was palpable. They all knew that accepting the inheritance wouldn't be a magical solution to their problems, but they also knew it was a step forward. Raphael's inheritance wasn't just about money, it was an attempt to heal the wounds he had left open for so long. As they left Robles' office, the rain had stopped. The air was fresh, and for the first time in weeks, the three siblings felt that there was a real possibility of starting over. Maybe not as a perfect family, but as three people united by a desire to understand one another and find some peace amid the chaos that had been their father's life. Though the decision about Rafael Monteverde's inheritance has been made, the challenges for Gabriel, Alejandra, and Andres are just beginning. With the weight of their past still present and family tension simmering, the siblings will have to learn how to navigate a new world, one where their father's legacy both binds them together and threatens to pull them apart. Can they build something stronger from the ruins of their shared history?